All right. Hello, everyone. It is about that time. Welcome in to the TSF GamePlan show. My name is Safwan Alvi. I will be your host, and I am joined, as always, by TSF writer, contributor, and, of course, a friend. That is Brandon Lampley, and we are TriStateFootball.com. Be sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms on Twitter and Instagram at TS Football. Again, that is at TS Football. You can also like us on Facebook and subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. Just type in TriStateFootball.com or specifically YouTube.com/TriStateFootball.com and Facebook.com/TriStateFootball.com. And especially on our YouTube channel, right? We just put up some interviews with some winning coaches and some winning players. So we highly recommend you guys going to our YouTube channel and watching that as well. All right, Brandon, it is week 5 of the playoffs. Our season is slowly but surely coming to an end, right? High school football season always goes fast. And we do got some teams to talk about, right? Because we have 7 teams left in the playoffs that we covered here at TriStateFootball.com, right? A couple from Southwest Ohio. And we also have some teams from Northern Kentucky. All of our teams from Eastern Indiana have gone home. They have lost. Milan was the last team. They were playing for semi-state, and they did lose last week. So I want to get right into it with some of these big games happening in the tri-state area. The state semifinals over here in Southwest Ohio, Brandon, trying to get to Canton, Ohio, right? The Hall of Fame, Tom Benson Stadium. And the big game we do want to talk about is that Division I semi-state final. The St. Xavier Bombers defeated the Elder Panthers last week at Paycor Stadium. It was 42-34. Really one of the best games you'll see. The environment, right? They sold over 22,000 tickets. It was a crazy game, right, between two GCL South foes. You know, exactly what you would expect. Elder had a 27-7 lead in that game, Brandon, but St. X came roaring back, getting some special teams action, a block punt to a field goal. Again, we could talk about that game forever, but I do want to talk about this semi-state game because they're playing Middletown, the Division I Region II champion for the first time ever. Middletown is going to the state semifinal game. Head coach Khalid Jones has done such an excellent job with that program. He did it with Withrow. We saw that a couple years ago. They are led by that defense, Brandon. Talk to me about this St. X team, this Middletown team, right? Both of them made it to that state semifinals. What are you looking for in this game? It's going to be very exciting. And for those interested, it is going to be at Welcome Stadium up there in Dayton. So what are you thinking about this game?
Well, you know, 2 great defenses, man. That's the thing that pops out at you. I've been on the CJ Bryant train and JD Singletary for the Middletown Middies. Just some high-level tacklers and sack artists, you know, really disrupt offenses, you know, and that's kind of what they've been leaning on here in the playoffs, you know, low-scoring games where the offense is just doing a little more, you know, but the defense has really been catapulting them to, you know, where they stand right now. So I think they'll have to be big again, obviously. I mean, you look at St. X, the same deal. Defense has been leading them, but the offense has really picked up here in the postseason where, I mean, 42 points, that we might not have said that about St. X in week 2 or 3. We might have been wondering if they could get 42 points across, you know, 3 or 4 weeks. But, I mean, the offense has picked up. Coming back from that 27-7, that's just for how their team has been this year, it's kind of like unheard of because you wouldn't expect them to be able to put up those amounts of points in that little bit of time. But they did it. So I'm looking at a defensive battle here. You know, Middletown, I think they're the underdog, but I mean, they've shown that they, you know, can beat teams, you know what I'm saying? Clearly. They beat Princeton, which is probably their best win on the season. Maybe Wayne last week, but I think Princeton's probably the best team that they beat. And, I mean, they've shown. Now, the only thing that would be comparable, I think, is I don't know if they played a tough, stingy defense. I feel like Lakota West is probably the best defense they played, and they struggled that game.
Yep.
So I'm curious about that. I'm leaning St. X, by a smidge, and it is going to the experience factor. It's going off of the two teams and where they're used to playing. St. X, they're used to being deep in the playoffs, although maybe this group hasn't. But they've been following St. X. They've been, they're used to these type of environments. But I think it's a close game. I would be surprised if this is a blowout. 21-17 Bombers.
Yeah, both of the opposing units for these teams, right, are really going to have to step up. For St. X, it's been prevalent. When you're looking at Middletown, in 3 postseason games, they've given up a total of 14 points in 3 postseason games. So that defense has been absolutely dominant. For St. X, who would have knew, like you said, they've scored 42 points in 2 of their first 3 postseason games. Right, we were thought it was going to be a lot of what the Mulder game was, right? 17-13, grind it out. When looking at this St. X offense, Brandon, the passing game, Logan Von Holly has been a game changer for them, right? Again, that Elder game, he had 5 receptions, 115 yards, and multiple touchdowns. In that Mulder game, even though he didn't get a lot of touchdowns and he didn't have, a groundbreaking game, he did have 90 receiving yards, right? If St. X generates a pass, right, because they have struggled to run the ball, but their passing game has gotten a lot better. Jackson Fry is really playing with a lot of confidence right now. And their defense is, and we've said it ad nauseum, they have so many playmakers. And now St. X is going to see another defense that has so many playmakers with, Singletary and Bryant. All they need is a semblance of an offense, right? A good, doesn't even have to be great offense, and they can win the state championship game, right? This is what I was saying, and I know you to a point were saying, in week 6, week 7, we're like, man, the St. X team has so much talent, right? Kobe Clapper and Braden Riley and Daniel Vollmer, Jackson Fry can sling it around. We've said these names over and over again because they're game changers, right? They're game breakers. And when they needed them the most, right? And the punt return, right? With Kobe Clapper with that big interception when they were losing in that game, I think it was in the second quarter, right? When they needed their guys to step up, they did, right? In the biggest moments, St. X has the guys that can change the game. Right. And they scored a lot of points. Right. And when you're looking at Middletown, the offense has to find a way to get going. Right. Because they only, as good as their defense has been, and it's been great, their offense has struggled these past couple weeks. Only 14 points against Springfield, only 21 points against Wayne. And one of them last week, if I'm not mistaken, was a kick return touchdown as well. Right. So one of those, wasn't even an offensive touchdown. There's so much to like about Middletown and what they have going forward. Right, because they've won a lot of playoff games now. They have the experience, right? They have a lot of good coaches on their staff, right? Guys like Jalen Marshall and, those Middletown legends are playing for them right now. So that's a lot of fun to see. I think this Middletown defense is going to come to play, and I know that's not, making a revolutionary statement, but St. X, I believe, is going to struggle for at least in half with this defense, right? I think Singletary is a game wrecker. He had led the GMC. I think it was like 17, 18 sacks this year. He was, absolutely a one-man machine all year. He's going to be a guy that the St. X offensive line, struggles with. Because if we are going to say the biggest struggling point for St. X, right, that offensive line, right? They haven't been able to get a lot of movement, right? They're struggling to run the ball, right? When you have CJ Bryant and when you have JD Singletary with 17 sacks, Brandon, that is a way for Middletown to, if they want to pull this upset, it's going to be in the trenches, and that defensive line is going to have to cause havoc.
Yeah, I think the game is definitely going to be decided in the trenches, like you say, because the Middletown secondary, even with Von Holly and McClatchy, they just dealt with Jameer Brown last week. So I don't think they're going to be fearful or, worried about if we can match up with those guys. But I think the size difference could play a role. Singletary, he's on the D line a lot, but he's small. He's a smaller guy, small, quick type of player. Mm-hmm. And some of those big offensive linemen can get hands on him and get up to the backers like Bryant. It could be some trouble there. And I'll say one more thing. It's kind of a shock to the system when you play a GCL South team, I think
Yep.
for the first time, just the physicality of the game, how the game is going to be played. It'll be different from any game Middletown's played this year. Probably Lakota West being the closest version of that, So it's like a basketball game where we're going to pass the ball around for most of the shot clock. We're going to take possessions away. It's kind of like that type of situation. It's not going to be up and down, up and down. We want to get you into a cage and just, we're right here. You know what I'm saying? We want to minimize the speed out there and things like that. So I think that's going to be something to take a look at. And, that Middletown offense, like you said, they got to give them at least, 28 points to win. Because, as well as the defense is, I think X will be able to find some ways to score, some long drives, punch it in. So we'll see what happens, but it's going to be a good game regardless.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun to watch, right? Middletown is going to gain this experience with all their players, right? X looking to go back for their state championship. The last one they went to was that 2020 COVID year, right? Remember they played at the Obet Stadium back in 2020. That was their last state championship appearance. Again, it's going to be an awesome game up at that Welcome Stadium up in Dayton. I do want to move on to my next game, Brandon, over here, Division 4, right? The champion of Division 4. Yet again, it's just a year of history because the Indian Hill, right, the Braves, they won their first ever regional championship and are going to the state semifinal for the first time ever, just like Middletown over there in Division 1. And there's so much to like about this Indian Hill team. Brandon, they dominated Valley View last week, 41-14, right? I feel like that was a statement win, right? And, you might ask, oh, how's that a statement win? They're in the third round of the playoffs. That Taft game was really close, right? And there were some controversial calls in that game, right? That last touchdown. And, there was a whole bunch of things going on with that Taft game. But they came out and dominated that Valley View team. And for me, that was a statement. I feel like that was needed, so not maybe show them because they believe it, but to show everyone who's watching them that we deserve to be here, right? We are a state semifinalist, and they came out and dominated a really good Valley View team, 41-14. Tell me about this Indian Hill team. What do you like, right? We know they got Devlin Daniel over there. Again, they're in the state semifinals for a reason and their first ever Division 4 region title.
Well, they're just playing tough football, and playing good defensive football. Holding that Taft team down, I said last week, it was very impressive to me. 19 points with all the talent they had. And I think it gave them a confidence boost, not only winning that game, but just holding the offensive firepower like Taft down like that. And I think they took that into the Valley View game. Evan Riggs, big on both sides of the – and, of course, Devlin Daniel running, doing a little defense too. And, I think they got a great chance to advance. I think they'll be looking at that Indian Valley team maybe in the championship, which would be, I think they're the defending state champs. And, you see what happens then. But, I don't know much about Shelby, but I think Indian Hill's got the guys to, get it done. I think they'll be, I think they'll have the athletic advantage, this round. And that defense keeps playing. I see them moving on.
Yeah, and when you mentioned about Indian Hill, right, Devlin Daniel gets all the shine, right, and he's a spectacular player. We know that. But the name you mentioned, Evan Riggs, having the running mate that he can rely on, having the running mate that he can hand the ball to 15 to 20 times is a really big factor for them. In last week's game, Daniel ran for 152 yards, averaged 9 a pop. He had a touchdown. Evan Riggs had 165 yards, averaged about 14 yards per carry, and had 4 touchdowns. Right, that right there, knowing Devlin Daniel that he has a running mate that he can do damage with, and it doesn't always have to be him. And when he's playing the quarterback position, he doesn't have to force throws. They can run the ball, right, chew out the clock, in the ways that other teams in Division 4, Region 16 like to do it, right? When Clinton Massey, they like to run the ball, right? Wyoming, they like to run the ball. Taft, right? This whole division, this whole region, Brandon, it's a running first, right? Valley View, right? The team they just beat, they like to run the ball. And when Indian Hill can do that with Daniel and Riggs, right, there's nobody that they can't beat, right? And when you beat Taft right? Because they're, coming into Division 4 Region 16, in many eyes were the favorites. When you beat them and then you dominate Valley View, right, they have a chance to win this game and then go to state. And Brandon, I think they have a chance to win it as well.
Yeah, for sure. Coach Rodenberg, bringing that physical aspect, that GCL type style over. And so, yeah, I think they got a great chance.
Absolutely. Again, that in Indian Hill division, the region champion for the first time ever. They will be playing this Friday for a chance at the state championship game. Brian, I do want to quickly touch on some Northern Kentucky teams. I know we don't talk too much about NKY on this one, but we have a couple teams still left. Unfortunately, it was a little bit of a rocky week last week for our Northern Kentucky teams. A lot of our teams did end up losing over there in Class 4A. Highlands and Covcat ended up losing. Both of them got beat pretty bad. Newport lost last week. Newport Central Catholic lost last week. But we do have some teams still alive, right? We do have the teams like Ryle, who won a really fun overtime game last week, right? They made it to the state championship last year. They're on the pursuit to make it to the state championship again this year, right? They're coached really well. Head coach Engler, they're 10-3 overall, right? They've won, I believe, 7 or 8. They're going to be playing South Warren in the Class 6A state semifinal. Brandon, they're one game away from that state semifinal. You think they can get this win tonight and, repeat what they did last year?
Yeah, I think many of our power Northern Kentucky teams, I think they have a distinct advantage over the rest of Kentucky. I feel like traditionally, they dominate and usually get to the finals a lot of the time. And, there, you probably run into somebody that's comparable to them. But, South Warren, again, not sure about them, but I know Jacob Savage on Ryle on both sides of the ball, Indiana commit, Barracks playing quarterback, and they got some great defensive players as well. And, they've been there before, so a lot of those guys playing in state championship last year, a lot of those guys hungry to get back. And I think that means a little bit, that you factor that in a little bit on both sides, because South Warren knows that too. So a little mental, game there. So, and I like Ryle getting to the championship. Not sure who's on the other side, but once you get there, you right there winning it, so 48 minutes away. So I see them winning this weekend, can definitely win the championship.
Yeah, Ryle looking to go back to that state championship game yet again. Again, they're going to be taking on South Warren in the Class 6A state championship game. They beat Frederick Douglass last week in a really awesome game, 28-27. They beat Eastern and Ballard earlier in the playoffs. I do want to move on to that next team over here, Brandon. How about Lloyd, right? The Juggernauts, undefeated so far, right? 13-0, right? Having just a quiet, really good and fun season. They're still alive, right? One of the only 7 teams still alive in our TriState Football teams. They're in the Class 3A, right? They beat Bath County in week 1. They beat Henry County in week 2, and then they just beat Russell last week. Again, the Class 3A state quarterfinal, right? They scored 48 points in their first 2 games. They've only given up, less than 30 points in those 3 games. What do you like about Lloyd, right? They're undefeated, having one of their best seasons and, maybe arguably their best season they've ever had in program history.
Yeah, Caleb Evans, man, he's kind of been the guy for them at quarterback. 186 yards, 2 touchdowns last week. Colton Barger, Izzy Turner were some of his wideouts that he hit for those touchdowns. And they had a great running game, too, from Avery Conrad. He had 81 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns of his own. And they kind of controlled the tempo. I think they want to run the football first. They had 153 yards as a team last week. And the defense, they held Russell, I think they played. They held Russell to just 94 yards rushing in the game. So, and Russell was a big-time rushing team from what I had heard of. So these are 2 undefeated teams. Murray and Lloyd Memorial, and I was able to do a little research on them so far. And Murray, they have a great quarterback as well, Wyatt Robbins, and he's a dual threat guy from what I saw. Can run, can pass. 225 and a touchdown last week. And they have a great wide receiver, Isaiah Martin, 11 receptions, 115 yards last week. So they certainly have a good team, but kind of like I was just saying, I think the Northern Kentucky teams, they're ready for when they get to these teams down the line. So again, they can go either way, especially two undefeated teams, two kind of high-powered offenses. But I like Lloyd getting through.
Yeah. Again, Lloyd in the midst of an undefeated season, the Juggernauts, they do take on Murray in the Class 3A state semifinal game over there. And Brandon, I want to talk about lastly, there probably isn't too much to say about this team because winning is literally all that they do. Beechwood, right? Beechwood, those Tigers, they continue to win. They continue to dominate. They come in to this game 11-1. The only game that they lost to was in week 4 against, Covcath, right? 42-14. But ever since then, they have been absolutely dominant. They've won a bunch of state titles. When you look at Beechwood's trophy case, they probably have more trophies than they can count. They probably have more trophies. They're probably going to have to start storing them somewhere else because they win so much. But what do you like about this Beechwood team, right? They're playing their best football now. They're going to be playing Owensboro Catholic in the Class 2A state semifinals. They beat Prestonburg. They beat Walton Verona as well in the playoffs. Anything left to be said about Beechwood that hasn't already been said?
Man, not truly. I mean, I think they played Owensboro Catholic last year. For some reason, when you said that, that just popped in my head. They might have played them in the semifinals or the championship last year.
Real quick.
But yeah, I think while you're doing that, distinct advantage, like you said. I mean, they got athletes. My guy, can't recall his name. He's a baseball player as well. Fryman, I believe. Mm-hmm. Tyler Fryman. Very, very active wide receiver, defensive back. And yeah, they just got players, and they just year after year. I think Queen is the quarterback this year. I haven't talked about them in a long time, since about week 4.
Yeah, and real quick, before you go on, because I do want you to go on, they did play them back in 2024, and they did beat them 44-7, right? That was in November 22nd. They beat Owensboro last year.
Yeah, see, that's what I thought. I remember that. That's probably around the semifinals.
Yep.
So yeah, I think it's going to be tough for any team when you're going against Beechwood. They got a whole lot of firepower and that winning tradition, man. So I see them bringing home another one.
Beechwood continuing to do what they do. It's a dynasty, right? It is a true definition of a high school football dynasty. They're reeling off state championships left and right there. All right, Brandon, before we get out of here, because that's pretty much all of our teams, right? That's pretty covered the bases of pretty much every team that's left. But it is going to be another fun week, right? We know some more teams are going to be going home this week, especially in that Middletown next game. Just anything on your mind as the season gets closer to coming to an end, less than 10 teams left, state championship games next week. Right, it's a lot of fun as Thanksgiving rolls around and the beginning of December rolls around. Anything on your mind before the state semifinal games?
Well, obviously, I'm looking at Middletown very closely. First regional championship in program history, as you said. And we look at the GMC. No state champions since I would say 2004. With Coleraine, possibly. Dominic.
You are correct. I don't think they've won a state championship. Coleraine made it in 2018, but obviously they lost that game. That's when they had Ivan Pace that year. Ivan Pace Jr., Deshaun Pace was on that team. They did lose to Lakewood St. Edwards. And yes, you're right. I don't believe they've won a state title since that, that dominant 2004 Coleraine team with head coach Combs and Dominic Goodman at quarterback and Mr. Simpson, right? Those guys. I believe, that is the last GMC team to win a championship.
So yeah, what a special thing that could be. GMC coming through with a championship. Obviously, 2 more tough games to go, no matter who comes out the other side. But I have my eye on that. Just public schools, GMC, be big for them to bring another one home. So.
Absolutely. It's a lot of fun, and it's really cool to see these teams, Middletown and Indian Hill, in the state semifinals for the first time ever, right? So not only are we seeing history, multiple teams, right, in Division I and Region 4 making history. Again, we're rooting for those teams. Again, we just love seeing, our Tri-State guys doing big things. So remember, go to tristatefootball.com/scores. You guys can see the Underground Sports Shop scoreboard, Friday as these games are going on. And then you can catch me and Greg on the post-game show to talk all things high school football after the St. Nick's game, which is on the radio as well. And that's going to do it for us. We appreciate everyone listening. We guys hope you enjoy the games. Happy Thanksgiving, to everyone listening. We always appreciate your time. Again, enjoy the games on Friday. For Brandon and Safwan from TriStateFootball.com, we'll see you next time.